right back to the beginning of our course, we learned about variables. And variables were used to store a piece of information temporarily. So for example, a string or a number. But in an object, we have a particular kind of variable. This is known as an instance variable. In order for us to understand instance variables and how they're useful, we must first break down what atra accessor is doing and understand the attributes of our object. Atra accessor is actually just a shortcut. In fact, what it's doing is defining two methods for us, a getter and a setter. The first is what's known as the getter. We use the getter to access attributes on our object. So for example, the name. So we would define a method, def name, and inside the name method is an instance variable called name. Note, we don't normally have to create these methods. This is what the atra accessor shortcut method does for us. The setter method, on the other hand, is called name equals and indicates that we're going to be assigning something. The equals is just a convention. We don't technically have to have the equals to assign something, but it makes it much easier when we're calling our code to understand what's happening. We're going to take the argument name once again, and this time we'll say the instance variable name equals name. So an instance variable is used to store internal information to the object. And we often use atra accessor to get access to those, but instance variables can have a great number of other uses as well. Let's break down what an instance variable looks like. It always starts with the @ symbol. It can only ever exist inside an object. You won't ever use an instance variable anywhere else. And they're only accessible within the particular object that we've created it in. So they can't be accessed inside another class. So if we have defined an instance variable inside the user class, we can't access that inside, say, the company class. Instance variables are nil until they are first set. This is in stark contrast to normal variables. If we don't set a normal variable before we try to access it, we'll get an error. We can actually use IRB to demonstrate this. Let's imagine we want to access a variable called foo, but we haven't defined this variable yet. Of course, as we might expect, Ruby gives us an error, undefined local variable or method, foo. Instance variables behave entirely differently, however. I haven't yet defined an instance variable called foo, but I can still access it. I don't get an error. Instead, I get a nil value returned. Of course, once I set a value, if I set a value to foo, let's just call it val inside a string, and then I read it back, now I get the expected behavior, and instance variables in this case behave in exactly the same way. And now to distinguish the difference between instance variables inside our objects and the normal variables we've used so far, we're going to call those previous variables local variables. Now in this exercise, this is not something that you would normally need to do because of course we have the atra accessor helper. But I would like you to replace the atra accessors in your class, in your user class, with getters and setters. And solution in the next video.